This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Catherine Eastman, June 2007. Dream Days by Kenneth Grahame. Section 7b. The Reluctant Dragon, Part 2. "I've brought a friend to see you, dragon," said the boy, rather loud. The dragon woke up with a start.
"I was just thinking about things,"
he said in his simple way.
"Very pleased to make your acquaintance, sir. Charming weather we're having."
"This is St. George," said the boy shortly. "St. George, let me introduce you to the dragon. We've come up to talk things over quietly, dragon, and now for goodness' sake do let us have a little straight common sense, and come to some practical business-like arrangement, for I'm sick of views and theories of life, and personal tendencies, and all that sort of thing. I may perhaps add that my mother's sitting up."
"So glad to meet you, St. George," began the dragon rather nervously, "because you've been a great traveller, I hear, and I've always been rather a stay-at-home. But I can show you many antiquities, many interesting features of our countryside, if you're stopping here any time."
"I think," said St. George in his frank, pleasant way, "that we'd really better take the advice of our young friend here, and try to come to some understanding on a business footing about this little affair of ours. Now, don't you think that after all the simplest plan would be just to fight it out according to the rules, and let the best man win? They're betting on you, I may tell you, down in the village, but I don't mind that." "Oh, yes, do, dragon," said the boy delightedly. "It'll save such a lot of bother."
"My young friend, you shut up," said the dragon severely. "Believe me, St. George," he went on, "there's nobody in the world I'd sooner oblige than you and this young gentleman here. But the whole thing's nonsense and conventionality and popular thick-headedness. There's absolutely nothing to fight about from beginning to end. And anyhow, I'm not going to, so that settles it."
"But supposing I make you?" said St. George, rather nettled.
"You can't," said the dragon triumphantly. "I should only go into my cave and retire for a time down the hole I came up. You'd soon get heartily sick of sitting outside and waiting for me to come out and fight you. And as soon as you'd really gone away, why, I'd come up again gaily, for I tell you frankly, I like this place, and I'm going to stay here."
St. George gazed for a while on the fair landscape around them. "But this would be a beautiful place for a fight," he began again persuasively. "These great bare rolling downs for the arena, and me in my golden armour showing up against your big blue scaly coils. Think what a picture it would make."
"Now you're trying to get at me through my artistic sensibilities," said the dragon. "But it won't work. Not but what it would make a very pretty picture, as you say," he added, wavering a little.
"We seem to be getting rather nearer to business," put in the boy. "You must see, dragon, that there's got to be a fight of some sort, 'cause you can't want to have to go down that dirty old hole again, and stop there till goodness knows when." "It might be arranged," said St. George thoughtfully. "I must spear you somewhere, of course, but I'm not bound to hurt you very much. There's such a lot of you that there must be a few spare places somewhere. Here, for instance, just behind your foreleg. It couldn't hurt you much just here."
"Now you're tickling, George,"
said the dragon coyly.
"No, that place won't do at all, even if it didn't hurt, and I'm sure it would awfully. It would make me laugh, and that would spoil everything."
"Let's try somewhere else, then," said St. George patiently. "Under your neck, for instance, all these folds of thick skin. If I speared you here, you'd never even know I'd done it."
"Yes, but are you sure you can hit off the right place?"
asked the dragon anxiously. "Of course I am," said St. George with confidence. "You leave that to me."
"It's just because I've got to leave it to you that I'm asking,"
replied the dragon rather testily.
"No doubt you would deeply regret any error you might make in the hurry of the moment, but you wouldn't regret it half as much as I should. However, I suppose we've got to trust somebody as we go through life, and your plan seems on the whole as good a one as any."
"Look here, dragon," interrupted the boy, a little jealous on behalf of his friend, who seemed to be getting all the worst of the bargain. "I don't quite see where you come in. There's to be a fight, apparently, and you're to be licked. And what I want to know is, what are you going to get out of it?"
"St. George,"
said the dragon,
"just tell him, please, what will happen after I'm vanquished in the deadly combat."
"Well, according to the rules, I suppose I shall lead you in triumph down to the market-place, or whatever answers to it," said St. George.
"Precisely," said
the dragon.
"And then?"
"And then there'll be shoutings and speeches and things," continued St. George, "and I shall explain that you're converted and see the error of your ways, and so on."
"Quite so,"
said the dragon.
"And then?"
"Oh, and then," said St. George, "why, and then there will be the usual banquet, I suppose."
"Exactly,"
said the dragon.
"And that's where I come in. Look here,"
he continued, addressing the boy,
"I'm bored to death up here, and no one really appreciates me. I'm going into society, I am, through the kindly aid of our friend here, who's taking such a lot of trouble on my account, and you'll find I've got all the qualities to endear me to people who entertain. So now that's all settled, and if you don't mind, I'm an old-fashioned fellow, don't want to turn you out, but—"
"Remember, you'll have to do your proper share of the fighting, dragon," said St. George, as he took the hint and rose to go. "I mean ramping and breathing fire and so on."
"I can ramp all right,"
replied the dragon confidently.
"As to breathing fire, it's surprising how easily one gets out of practice, but I'll do the best I can. Good night."
They had descended the hill, and were almost back in the village again, when St. George stopped short. "Knew I had forgotten something," he said. "There ought to be a princess, terror-stricken and chained to a rock, and all that sort of thing. Boy, can't you arrange a princess?" The boy was in the middle of a tremendous yawn. "I'm tired to death," he wailed, "and I can't arrange a princess or anything more at this time of night. And my mother's sitting up, and do stop asking me to arrange more things till tomorrow." Next morning The people began streaming up to the downs at quite an early hour, in their Sunday clothes and carrying baskets with bottle-necks sticking out of them, every one intent on securing good places for the combat. This was not exactly a simple matter, for of course it was quite possible that the dragon might win, and in that case even those who had put their money on him felt they could hardly expect him to deal with his backers on a different footing to the rest. Places were chosen, therefore, with circumspection, and with a view to a speedy retreat in case of emergency, and the front rank was mostly composed of boys who had escaped from parental control, and now sprawled and rolled about on the grass, regardless of the shrill threats and warnings discharged at them by their anxious mothers behind. The boy had secured a good front place, well up towards the cave, and was feeling as anxious as a stage manager on a first night. Could the dragon be depended upon? He might change his mind and vote the whole performance rot; or else, seeing that the affair had been so hastily planned, without even a rehearsal, he might be too nervous to show up. The boy looked narrowly at the cave, but it showed no sign of life or occupation. Could the dragon have made a moonlight flitting? The higher portions of the ground were now black with sightseers, and presently a sound of cheering and a waving of handkerchiefs told that something was visible to them, which the boy, far up towards the dragon end of the line as he was, could not yet see. A minute more, and St. George's red plumes topped the hill, as the saint rode slowly forth on the great level space which stretched up to the grim mouth of the cave. Very gallant and beautiful he looked, on his tall war-horse, his golden armour glancing in the sun, his great spear held erect, the little white pennon, crimson-crossed, fluttering at its point. He drew rein and remained motionless. The lines of spectators began to give back a little nervously, and even the boys in front stopped pulling hair and cuffing each other, and leaned forward expectant. "Now then, dragon!" muttered the boy impatiently, fidgeting where he sat. He need not have distressed himself had he only known. The dramatic possibilities of the thing had tickled the dragon immensely, and he had been up from an early hour preparing for his first public appearance, with as much heartiness as if the years had run backwards, and he had been again a little dragonlet, playing with his sisters on the floor of their mother's cave, at the game of saints and dragons, in which the dragon was bound to win. A low muttering, mingled with snorts, now made itself heard, rising to a bellowing roar that seemed to fill the plain. Then a cloud of smoke obscured the mouth of the cave, and out of the midst of it the dragon himself, shining, sea-blue, magnificent, pranced splendidly forth, and everybody said "Ooh!" as if he had been a mighty rocket. His scales were glittering, his long spiky tail lashed his sides, his claws tore up the turf and sent it flying high over his back, and smoke and fire incessantly jetted from his angry nostrils. "Oh, well done, dragon!" cried the boy excitedly. "Didn't think he had it in him," he added to himself. St. George lowered his spear, bent his head, dug his heels into his horse's sides, and came thundering over the turf. The dragon charged with a roar and a squeal, a great blue whirling combination of coils and snorts and clashing jaws and spikes and fire. "Missed!" yelled the crowd. There was a moment's entanglement of golden armour and blue-green coils and spiky tail, and then the great horse, tearing at his bit, carried the saint, his spear swung high in the air, almost up to the mouth of the cave. The dragon sat down and barked viciously, while St. George with difficulty pulled his horse round into position. "End of round 1," thought the boy. "How well they managed it! But I hope the saint won't get excited. I can trust the dragon all right. What a regular play-actor the fellow is!" St. George had at last prevailed on his horse to stand steady, and was looking round him as he wiped his brow. catching sight of the boy, he smiled and nodded, and held up 3 fingers for an instant. "It seems to be all planned out," said the boy to himself. "Round 3 is to be the finishing one, evidently. Wish it could have lasted a bit longer. Whatever's that old fool of a dragon up to now?" The dragon was employing the interval in giving a ramping performance for the benefit of the crowd. Ramping, it should be explained, consists in running round and round in a wide circle, and sending waves and ripples of movement along the whole length of your spine, from your pointed ears right down to the spike at the end of your long tail. When you are covered with blue scales, the effect is particularly pleasing, and the boy recollected the dragon's recently expressed wish to become a social success. St. George now gathered up his reins and began to move forward, dropping the point of his spear and settling himself firmly in the saddle. "Time!" yelled everybody excitedly, and the dragon, leaving off his ramping, sat up on end and began to leap from one side to the other with huge ungainly bounds, whooping like a red Indian. This naturally disconcerted the horse, who swerved violently, the saint only just saving himself by the mane; and as they shot past, the dragon delivered a vicious snap at the horse's tail, which sent the poor beast careering madly far over the downs, so that the language of the saint, who had lost a stirrup, was fortunately inaudible to the general assemblage. Round 2 evoked audible evidence of friendly feeling towards the dragon. The spectators were not slow to appreciate a combatant who could hold his own so well, and clearly wanted to show good sport, and many encouraging remarks reached the ears of our friend as he strutted to and fro, his chest thrust out and his tail in the air, hugely enjoying his new popularity. St. George had dismounted, and was tightening his girths, and telling his horse, with quite an oriental flow of imagery, exactly what he thought of him, and his relations, and his conduct on the present occasion; so the boy made his way down to the saint's end of the line, and held his spear for him. "It's been a jolly fight, St. George," he said with a sigh. "Can't you let it last a bit longer?" "Well, I think I'd better not," replied the saint. "The fact is, your simple-minded old friend's getting conceited now they've begun cheering him, and he'll forget all about the arrangement and take to playing the fool, and there's no telling where he would stop. I'll just finish him off this round." He swung himself into the saddle and took his spear from the boy. "Now, don't you be afraid," he added kindly. "I've marked my spot exactly, and he's sure to give me all the assistance in his power, because he knows it's his only chance of being asked to the banquet." St. George now shortened his spear, bringing the butt well up under his arm, and, instead of galloping as before, trotted smartly towards the dragon, who crouched at his approach, flicking his tail till it cracked in the air like a great cart-whip. The saint wheeled as he neared his opponent, and circled warily round him, keeping his eye on the spare place; while the dragon, adopting similar tactics, paced with caution round the same circle, occasionally feinting with his head. So the two sparred for an opening, while the spectators maintained a breathless silence. Though the round lasted for some minutes, the end was so swift that all the boy saw was a lightning movement of the saint's arm, and then a whirl and a confusion of spines, claws, tail, and flying bits of turf. The dust cleared away, the spectators whooped and ran in cheering, and the boy made out that the dragon was down, pinned to the earth by the spear, while St. George had dismounted and stood astride of him. It all seemed so genuine that the boy ran in breathlessly, hoping the dear old dragon wasn't really hurt. As he approached, the dragon lifted one large eyelid, winked solemnly, and collapsed again. He was held fast to earth by the neck, but the saint had hit him in the spare place agreed upon, and it didn't even seem to tickle. "Bain't you going to cut his head orf, master?" asked one of the applauding crowd. He had backed the dragon, and naturally felt a trifle sore. "Well, not to-day, I think," replied St. George pleasantly. "You see, that can be done at any time. There's no hurry at all. I think we'll all go down to the village first, and have some refreshment, and then I'll give him a good talking to, and you'll find he'll be a very different dragon." At that magic word refreshment, the whole crowd formed up in procession, and silently awaited the signal to start. The time for talking and cheering and betting was past. The hour for action had arrived. St. George, hauling on his spear with both hands, released the dragon, who rose and shook himself, and ran his eye over his spikes and scales and things, to see that they were all in order. Then the saint mounted and led off the procession, the dragon following meekly in the company of the boy, while the thirsty spectators kept at a respectful interval behind. There were great doings when they got down to the village again, and had formed up in front of the inn. After refreshment, St. George made a speech, in which he informed his audience that he had removed their direful scourge, at a great deal of trouble and inconvenience to himself, and now they weren't to go about grumbling and fancying they'd got grievances, because they hadn't; and they shouldn't be so fond of fights, because next time they might have to do the fighting themselves, which would not be the same thing at all. And there was a certain badger in the inn stables which had got to be released at once, and he'd come and see it done himself. Then he told them that the dragon had been thinking over things, and saw that there were two sides to every question, and he wasn't going to do it any more, and if they were good, perhaps he'd stay and settle down there. So they must make friends, and not be prejudiced and go about fancying that they knew everything there was to be known, because they didn't, not by a long way. And he warned them against the sin of romancing, and making up stories and fancying other people would believe them just because they were plausible and highly coloured. Then he sat down, amidst much repentant cheering, and the dragon nudged the boy in the ribs, and whispered that he couldn't have done it better himself. Then everyone went off to get ready for the banquet. Banquets are always pleasant things, consisting mostly, as they do, of eating and drinking. But the specially nice thing about a banquet is, that it comes when something's over, and there's nothing more to worry about, and tomorrow seems a long way off. St. George was happy because there had been a fight, and he hadn't had to kill anybody, for he didn't really like killing, though he generally had to do it. The dragon was happy because there had been a fight, and so far from being hurt in it, he had won popularity and a sure footing in society. The boy was happy because there had been a fight, and in spite of it all his two friends were on the best of terms. And all the others were happy because there had been a fight, and, well, they didn't require any other reasons for their happiness. The dragon exerted himself to say the right thing to everybody, and proved the life and soul of the evening; while the saint and the boy, as they looked on, felt that they were only assisting at a feast of which the honour and the glory were entirely the dragon's. But they didn't mind that, being good fellows, and the dragon was not in the least proud or forgetful. On the contrary, every 10 minutes or so he leant over towards the boy and said impressively, "Look here, you will see me home afterwards, won't you?" And the boy always nodded, though he had promised his mother not to be out late. At last the banquet was over. The guests had dropped away with many good nights and congratulations and invitations, and the dragon, who had seen the last of them off the premises, emerged into the street, followed by the boy, wiped his brow, sighed, sat down in the road, and gazed at the stars. "Jolly night it's been," he murmured. "Jolly stars. Jolly little place this. Think I shall just stop here.
Don't feel like climbing up any beastly hill. Boy's promised to see me home. Boy had better do it then. No responsibility on my part. Responsibility all boys."
And his chin sank on his broad chest, and he slumbered peacefully. "Oh, get up, dragon!" cried the boy piteously. "You knew my mother's sitting up. And I'm so tired, and you made me promise to see you home, and I never knew what it meant, or I wouldn't have done it." And the boy sat down in the road by the side of the sleeping dragon, and cried. The door behind them opened, a stream of light illumined the road, and St. George, who had come out for a stroll in the cool night air, caught sight of the two figures sitting there, the great motionless dragon and the tearful little boy. "What's the matter, boy?" he inquired kindly, stepping to his side. "Oh, it's this great lumbering pig of a dragon," sobbed the boy. "First he makes me promise to see him home, and then he says I'd better do it, and goes to sleep. Might as well try to see a haystack home. And I'm so tired, and mother's—" Here he broke down again. "Now don't take on," said St. George. "I'll stand by you, and we'll both see him home. Wake up, dragon," he said sharply, shaking the beast by the elbow. The dragon looked up sleepily.
"What a night, George!" he murmured. "What a—"
"Now look here, dragon," said the saint firmly. "Here's this little fellow waiting to see you home, and you know he ought to have been in bed these 2 hours, and what his mother'll say I don't know, and anybody but a selfish pig would have made him go to bed long ago."
"And he shall go to bed," cried the dragon, starting up. "Poor little chap, only fancy his being up at this hour. It's a shame, that's what it is, and I don't think, St. George, you've been very considerate. But come along at once, and don't let us have any more arguing or shilly-shallying. You give me hold of your hand, boy. Thank you, George, an arm up the hill is just what I wanted."
So they set off up the hill arm in arm, the saint, the dragon, and the boy. The lights in the little village began to go out, but there were stars and a late moon as they climbed to the downs together. And as they turned the last corner and disappeared from view, snatches of an old song were borne back on the night breeze. I can't be certain which of them was singing, but I think it was the dragon. "Here we are at your gate," said the man abruptly, laying his hand on it. "Good night. Cut along in sharp, or you'll catch it." Could it really be our own gate? Yes, there it was, sure enough, with the familiar marks on its bottom bar, made by our feet when we swung on it. "Oh, but wait a minute!" cried Charlotte. "I want to know a heap of things. Did the dragon really settle down, and did—" "There isn't any more of that story," said the man, kindly but firmly. "At least, not tonight. Now be off. Good-bye." "Wonder if it's all true," said Charlotte, as we hurried up the path. "Sounded dreadfully like nonsense in parts." "P'raps it's true, for all that," I replied encouragingly. Charlotte bolted in like a rabbit out of the cold and the dark, but I lingered for a moment in the still, frosty air, for a backward glance at the silent white world without, ere I changed it for the land of firelight and cushions and laughter. It was the day for choir practice, and carol time was at hand, and a belated member was passing homewards down the road, singing as he went. Then St. George he made reverence in the stable so dim, who vanquished so grim, and so fierce, that now we may say, oh, peaceful is our waking on Christmas Day.
The singer receded, the carol died away. But I wondered, with my hand on the door latch, whether that was the song, or something like it, that the dragon sang as he toddled contentedly up the hill. End of Section 7B of Dream Days by Kenneth Grahame.